At this time, I'll call our recess back to order, and I'll turn it over to County Manager Brian Alligood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. As we finished up last meeting, we are now going into education. With the board's permission, what we'd like to do is move forward with the school system, the community college, and then back up and get DSS. We talked about that. They were not able to be here because they had a DSS conference. Pick them up and then move our way through public safety. Dr. Cheeseman's here tonight to answer questions, any questions the board may have about the school budget. He's got a graduation he's got to go to, so we've got him first up, and I'll kind of kick that off. You'll see in our recommended budget, we obviously had that in place like we did last year before we got the information, the final information from schools. So we brought the current expense forward from last year, and then as you'll recall, the finance officer was speaking with the board about the restricted sales tax money that by statute has to either be encumbered in a special reserve fund or transferred to the school system for capital expenditures. So, our proposal on that, I think the school system made the suggestion that the board look at the technology piece because they had such a large technology expenditure based on the COVID funds, that the board starts setting aside some funds to take care of that in later years when they need to replace that as a bulk because it came in as a bulk. So, in that vein, what we would propose to you going forward probably is to take the current the additional sales tax money that we won't be able to calculate until September, and essentially set that aside in a capital reserve for the schools like they talked about. We did bring forward in this proposal for the new fiscal year under cash capital, we did bump that to 1.675, and that's based on what we estimate the sales tax would be. So the board would then need to look at that. I mean, you may want to leave all that way it is. You may want to take some of that as well and move it toward a reserve to be able to build that fund up when they need it later. But essentially that is where you are, and you have all the information that we have. You have the school's information, and I guess I'll turn that over if you have any questions to the superintendent and his finance officer.
Well, since we've already had the presentation, unless somebody's got anybody got any additional questions?
Well, I need some additional information.
Okay, go ahead.
I got the list from you with the number of people that are paid from county expenses, and it's just about as bare bones as it can be. How about having a job title at least on the list? And then maybe we go back with some job descriptions to see what these people are doing. I got what was essentially a cryptic list of numbers.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. And the number of people that are in that, well, if you list by, I think you listed by employee number, if I remember right.
Yes, we did.
And then it was some other stuff, but salary, job title, and how many part-time employees do you have?
Okay.
I'd like to know that too.
That we're paying for.
Yeah, that we're paying for.
Yep. Yeah, we can get that to you. And Commissioner Richardson, we'll send it back to Brian so you can share it with everybody.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Everybody good?
I'm good. Well,
Yeah, I'm sorry.
go ahead.
Do you have, and it seems to me that 2 years ago in the presentation, you had a rather extensive list, almost every reserve study of what the future needs were going to be for capital expenditures.
Yes.
Okay, I don't think we got that this year. All we got was the ones that came from the principals.
Brian?
No, you had something I thought was much more extensive than that, with like coolers and chillers and roofs and all that type of stuff.
Right, so in 2 years, we've narrowed some of that down, so that's come down a bit. But we've actually are able to use our ESSER funds, and we've done an RFP specifically looking at HVAC and chillers. And so we've put that into a different bucket of an RFP with our ESSER funds. We can send that proposal to Brian, and he can share that with you.
Okay.
But the list that County Manager Alligood has is the exhaustive list, and I think that totals about $5.5 million or something in there. Yeah, so that would be it.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because at some future date, though, you're not going to have ESSER funds.
September 2024.
Yeah. And then the county would be responsible for coolers and chillers and all that stuff that goes out.
Right, which is why we're trying to use those funds now, so it would not be the burden of the county. Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
And if you think through it this way, there's been some debate statewide and even at the federal level whether ESSER money should be used for HVAC, especially if you had a pre-existing issue with your HVAC prior to COVID.
Right.
And so we're trying to do a set aside right now between $4 and $5 million to say, look, we can save our county that amount of money if we earmark that towards the schools for HVAC and boilers, chillers. The issue is those projects have to be done 100% to fruition. Otherwise, if the project ends after the expiration date, then your local funding is on the hook for it. So we don't anticipate that we would be able to hit every single school just based on material and timeline of when it would come in.
Sure.
So we can give you an update as we move forward with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Did you have another one, Hood?
No, that's it.
Okay. I'm sorry, Ed Booth is running a little bit late. Have you heard anything from Randy?
Randy's videoing the graduation.
Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
So if he has an additional question, we'll just send it to Brian and let him send it to you.
Absolutely.
So,
Thank you very much. Appreciate it, team.
thank you.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, if you move on to the community college, start on page 129, just a quick rundown on that, and Dr. Luke is here tonight if you have any additional questions. The current expenses is up about $200,000. The cash capital is down about 500 or so, or a little less than 500. And that, remember, we talked about was because you did some one-time capital last year for the boat building startup piece. So that's one time. So overall, the budget was down just slightly. The proposal not in the community college budget, but the proposal in the budget based on the board's direction and vote previously on the Beaufort Promise program is that we've taken $1 million out of fund balance and set it aside into a special revenue fund with the intent of that being a 4-year cycle so that the community college could charge against that at $250,000 a year, or if the board wanted to adjust that up or down, so that they could provide the program that they're looking to do, that they've talked to you about, in providing tuition-free education for folks in Beaufort County to complete at community college.
Why don't we just fund that at $250,000 a year out of regular budget?
Well, I mean, that's up to the board. What we've proposed to you is to take $1 million out of fund balance and set it aside in a special revenue fund so it's there and it's dedicated for that, and it can be drawn down. What we proposed was a 4-year cycle because the board said you wanted to be able to watch it and see and study it, kind of like a pilot project, to make sure that there was a return and that you saw it doing what you wanted it to do. So that was the proposal that was what we put together based on what we heard the board say.
Well, what I see going on here early on in this process is pulling a lot of money out of the general fund so that we avoid giving a tax decrease this year.
Well, I mean, that's certainly one way of, you could look at it, if that's the way you choose to look at it. The way we see it is as a way of enabling the county to better and enhance its workforce development processes, and to certainly work towards trying to stop the out-migration of students here moving forward, which we continue to see. The only way we think that we're going to try to stop that out-migration and to try to build a workforce for Beaufort County as well as the other 3 counties that we'll serve through our foundation is to try and continue with the Beaufort Promise program, which has increased our enrollment by some 22% over the last year. Otherwise, we think that folks are going to continue to leave the area and go to other places to go to school. This is a good way for us to really try to plan in a strategic way for the workforce development and thus the economic development for Beaufort County for the next 4 years at the very least and beyond, we think. And so that's why we're asking for this commitment from the county to enable us to strike down one of those barriers, being tuition and fees in this case, for those students who are going to stay here. We're not talking about the dual enrollment students or the students who are in early college, high school. They go for free already, compliments of the state. This is for the students who are going to stay in the area, hopefully, who are in the career and technical education programs or who are 18 to 45 years old or beyond, who are seeking to improve their career and technical abilities. And it could be in short-term workforce development like CDL, truck driving. It could be in welding. It could be in mechanical engineering technology. It could be in HVAC. So it's for the trades and for career and technical and for older students in particular. So that's our plan.
What we're doing now is investing in our young folk as well as some of our older folk, and so what's being proposed is a good thing, and I think you'll see it come to fruition.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Let me go back on that just a minute. We've already admitted that we don't know how this program is going to turn out, that we're going to keep an eye on it. We are funding 2 complete school cycles, 4 years. You know, as far as I'm concerned, it's money down another rat hole. Fund it annually so you can look at it and see what it's doing. Because what's been proposed is a 4-year guarantee with no performance standards. So it's not good government, it's not good spending, and it's not good for the people of Beaufort County.
Well, I think the performance standards have to speak for themselves in the enrollment of the students and continuing enrollment of the students at the college. Students vote with their feet. And if they're going to come and they're going to stay here instead of driving past us and going to Pitt County or to other places, then they're going to continue to enroll at Beaufort. I think that the fact that we're proposing to limit what Beaufort County would spend on this just to Beaufort County residents. It would be for 9 or more credits, which is about the average of what students who are with us now who are taking free tuition and fees, complements of the HERF federal funding are taking, or 50-hour programs related to career and technical training on the continuing education workforce side. So we think the proof's in the pudding with respect to whether the students stay or not over time. Sure, the students who are coming from Pitt County or from Lenoir County or wherever right now may not stay with us because they'll have to pay the full freight. But the proof will be in how many of the Beaufort County students stay with us and come to us, because we will be able to remove that barrier, one of the barriers for our students, which is most of the tuition and fees. Most of our students are poor. They are working poor, which means that they are folks who have multiple part-time jobs sometimes, or even a full-time job perhaps, but they have the cost of attendance, which is, of course, going to be health care, child care, transportation costs, all those other things that are still barriers out there that they're going to have to try to cover through some other means. So for us, this is a way of trying to invest, as Commissioner Langley said, in the future of workforce development and economic development for this county. I think it can change the economic development landscape here if we are able to move forward with something that will try to reduce some of these obstacles for certainly a population of 18 to 45 and beyond.
Commissioner Rebels,
In answer to your question, Hood, I think it's critical that we make a long-term commitment. We just don't throw this out here for a year and say, next year we could pull it back. I think there's got to be a commitment here of that time frame in order for us to be able to properly evaluate it. So I'm in full support of this program.
Stan?
Are all Beaufort County residents that use this program funded by Beaufort County? Are they all American citizens?
I can't guarantee that right now, but if that's something that the commission decides that it wants to require, then that's something we will put into the guidelines.
We did talk about it.
That's something we would put into the guidelines for the program.
I thought that was going to be in the guidelines.
Well, we haven't put together the guidelines yet because it hasn't been funded.
Well,
So it will change from what it is.
Board that
Yeah.
should be in the guidelines.
Yeah, well, it would be in the guidelines, like I say, after you guys decide whether or not you want to fund it or not, we would
Okay.
put it in there,
All right.
dutifully so.
Okay, one more time.
We might as well make this into a fun thing, folks. I've sat here for years. We've invested in Beaufort County. We've invested in Beaufort County over $70 million a year in the school system, K through 12. We've invested in the community college year after year. We've poured money into that. The truth of the matter is the community college is overbuilt right now. Everything is an investment, an investment, an investment. It's nothing but socialism. That's what we're talking about in here right now, pure socialism. And if you guys want to buy into it and you want to go for the socialist thing, the taxpayers will have to decide.
Yes, Ed.
I remember a few years ago, Doc, we had this same conversation about early college. It was socialism then, and that's one of the best programs that we have in this area. And I support what you're trying to do. I hope that this board don't stoop low enough to limit any child from furthering their education. If you're in the school system, then you should be able to go to schools. I know they're talking about the Latinos, but they're here and they're part of our program. And they should be a part of all programs that we have.
And it's like Jefferson said, a nation that wants to be ignorant and free wants what never was and never will be. Higher education serves not only the individual, but the common good of this nation. If we're going to be a democratic republic where people are going to make decisions for themselves, they're going to have the capacity to make those decisions. That's what higher education helps them do.
Can I go?
Yes.
Well, you referred to Jefferson. Back in his day, there was no public education.
Yes, but he created it.
He did for a college in Virginia, and that was it. I think, and I would like to restate, if anybody has a green card, I probably wouldn't have they'd be here illegally. Maybe you could expand to them being able to use that function that supports Beaufort County citizens. I don't know, that's up for debate, but flat out illegals is, I can't see where the taxpayers of Beaufort County need to, as Booth so eloquently spoke, if they're in the school system, which in the public education system, at least primary school system, they have to be funded as per the Supreme Court ruling some years ago. And so that is part of the funding. But I do not think there should be a continuation where people are here illegally, especially now where they're being brought across the border in droves. The taxpayers of Beaufort County fund that and make that as a protractive nuisance, so to speak, to bring them into our country, free education, yet we pay for it while our children can't get baby formula. I mean, it's just ridiculous at this point. We can't do but so much for everyone in the world. America's a wonderful place, but we cannot be the last resort for the rest of the world to come and live here, free education notwithstanding. So I think we need to rethink free education for everyone, because I don't think that's going to work. I think mathematically it is a functional impossibility.
Anyone else have a question concerning the budget? Okay. Thank you very much, Dr.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if, with the board's pleasure, if you'll move back to social services, that's on page 61. And just in general, like we talked about in the budget presentation, under Human Services, overall, those cost centers, which include DSS and the Health Department, were up about 5.1%. Again, we look at DSS like we look at the Health Department on what that cost share dollar is, and we do show that there's a 1% increase. It's increased from 43% to 44% on their budget, but if you'll go to page 61, you'll see the detail of their different programs, and the director is here to answer any questions you may have.
Questions for DSS?
I have one question.
Go ahead.
Do you have any programs that are totally funded by Beaufort County?
No, we have the Community Alternatives Program that the county funds some towards, and the Home and Community Care Block Grant that the county funds some towards, but none that I'm aware of totally funded by the county.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, you might as well sit in here
I
and
think we'll wait a little bit.
let Kelly tell you when it stops raining. We can see the rain. Okay. Okay, Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Moving on to public safety, the Sheriff's Office, and the Sheriff's Office is included in the Sheriff's Office, the jail, and E911 communications. That starts on page 135, and the Chief Deputy is here to answer any questions that you may have. Again, the overall picture that we talked about in the budget presentation was that, yes, the departmental budget is up a little bit, but that's also in considering that we've got inflation that's hitting us pretty hard. They have a tremendous amount of vehicles that are on the road. Gas prices are up. Gas prices are going to continue to be up. We've tried to take some of that into consideration. We anticipate the census in the jail will go up. There has been some issues that we need to address on meal costs to make sure that we're able to cover those. So we anticipate some increases there. We want to make sure that the vendor that's providing those funds is able to do that and not go bankrupt and not be able to provide those meals to the inmates, which we're required to do. And then there's additional cost, as we talked about, with supply chain issues on the maintenance of vehicles, as well as we had proposed, and the Chief Deputy has some information for you on the vehicles. As you recall, several years ago, we had kind of come to a gentleman's agreement that we would try to get to 10 vehicles in the replacement cycle. We were at a point where we felt we could get back to that. So in this budget, it is showing a 10-vehicle replacement cycle, and that's at $400,000 to replace, and that may not be 10 vehicles, because vehicles are outrageous as they are right now. So essentially, it's whatever $400,000 will buy. So, but the Chief Deputy is here to answer any of your questions specifically about the vehicles, because that question came at the last meeting, and so he's got a spreadsheet for you on that, and then any additional questions as you dive down into that budget that you may have that he can answer for you. Thank you.
Okay. It's open for questions. John?
Charlie, the first question is, under the monitoring that we've done, that you got the budget for the, what do we call it?
Pretrial release?
Yes. Electronic house arrest. Some of the discussions we've had was we wanted to increase that. Is that enough to increase the use of that?
The number that was selected in the budget is basically based on the trends of spending for the last 3 or 4 years. And that is really based on the fact that anybody who spends any substantial amount of time in the jail gets the application sent through, and then it's up to the judge to sign off on. So if we were to increase the amount of monitors that we have and increase the number of people, then we would need to spend more than the $40,000 that we have. It's just we budgeted on the trends that we've had for the last handful of years.
That's basically a contract service, though, isn't it?
It is. We use a vendor that, but it's not, it's pretty much a pay-as-you-play type deal. We are charged on the amount of units that we have at any given time, and we can increase or reduce those units based on the workload that we have any time.
Okay.
Charlie,
Were you finished?
No, I was just going to ask about the storage rent,
Go ahead.
which is a 100% increase over last year.
Yes.
What's happening?
Well, we had an opportunity come up over, well, let me start back a little bit farther than that. We've needed to address storage issues for the last several years. And up until recently, what we would do is we would have storage units inside the Clico building that's near Kugler Field.
Right.
And every time a unit opens up, we would absorb that unit. So we were slowly getting to the point that we were in control of more and more of that building, so we can satisfy more of the storage needs, mainly from the Oakland building, but some from the court annex where our drug unit is housed as well. You know, if you go, anybody who comes into the sheriff's office right now, you know, in any corner of the building, we've got filing cabinets, we've got boxes, we've got different places that we're about 8 pounds of stuff in a 5-pound bag, so we were looking to get more storage. Over the last year, we had an opportunity with the same vendor that owned, or the same people that own Clico. They purchased a building that I guess Roriton's owned at one particular point in time, and they were going to make that into a mini storage. So instead of us continuing just to absorb more space inside the Clico building that we are, they gave us the opportunity to rent the entire building, to make modifications as we needed to that building, and then that's where we are now. So if anybody would like to come take a look at that facility, then just get in touch with me, and we can.
Is that a long-term lease?
No, we can't. Pretty much anything that we try to do, once again, we go by the rules that you have from the county, and I try to get any agreement that we have at the sheriff's office, I try to keep at a year or under. So it's a little bit cleaner for us to handle that. And so the first bit was a 6 month to get us in, and then after that it's going to be year to year on the fiscal year, so we can get in or out at any particular point in time. And the owner of the establishment has worked with us very well.
Okay.
Shirley, I'm having a senior moment. What is inmate out-of-facility services?
Okay. So several years back, and let me get to the jail portion. Several years back, there was some questions and requests that Commissioner Richardson made to break out some of the costs for inmate medical health.
Okay.
So working with finance, we sort of drilled down into those numbers that would have just been at that point inmate medical, and put it to the point where you can see more of the funds that are being used for medications, for in-house medical when the health department came on board, and for the medical costs for inmates that are outside of the facility would be if we have an inmate that's being housed in the prison system as a safekeeper.
I got you.
And then they go to the hospital or have surgery or anything else, that would be where you would see that. And as more information would be, not just with the state prison system, but if the person was at a sister jail somewhere and they had medical, then you would see that in that number.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Ed?
Mr. Manager, you stated earlier that you want to get back on the 10-car rotation, and I hate to keep beating this horse to death. In your same statement, you said we'll buy as many as we can for that money. So what happens if you want to get on a 10-car rotation? What happens if you can only buy 5 that money is allocated for? What happens then?
I think we do the best we can with what we have. Our hope is that we would be able to buy off state contract or whatever contracts that are helping negotiate those prices and keep them lower. But obviously, there's an increase in cost for everything. So, will that fund 10 cars? I don't know. We'll have to see what the market is like. But if it only funds 8 or if it only funds 6, then we're later down the line. We've got to somehow figure out how to work that.
How much of an increase have you seen in the price of vehicles?
It depends on what type of vehicle. We've got, and I have zero doubt that in the budget that we can get 10 vehicles in. Just looking at the information on the spreadsheet that I gave, which should answer a lot of the questions about vehicles, especially surplus vehicles or unassigned vehicles that you have. We have a plan for vehicles that really is, we present it yearly, but we look at it all of the time. And the plans for what we've got going on for next year and the year after that and the year after that really started 3 or 4 years ago, and looking on that cycle. So we've been fairly smart with our planning. We've got a mixed fleet, and we've got a fleet that we've purchased vehicles not in, and bulk is probably not the great word, but we haven't bought a whole bunch of the same type vehicles in the same year, so they're going to come due to be replaced in the same year, if that makes sense. So we've done as much of that as we can. Probably the most, the worst part of anything of the planning right now in vehicles is that the Dodge Charger is slated to come off the line. Dodge is already saying that they're not going to make the Charger as a police package vehicle moving forward. If that is like what happened when the Ford stopped making their Crown Victoria, then we're good, because they said that they were going to stop making their Crown Victoria for 10 years. But so we've got to plan ahead on that. The Charger has been an absolute great sedan for us at one of the lowest price points. They were lower than the Chevy, they were lower than the Ford, and they were good. They've been really good cars for us, even though other agencies had issues with them. So I think that we'll be able to, with the funds, be able to fully outfit 10 vehicles, which means that we can replace the higher mile vehicles that we have now and the ones that will be high mile vehicles by the time we get those outfitted, which won't be until really January of next year. So once we get the budget, we order those vehicles in September or October, we get those vehicles in and get them outfitted. It's actually, the beginning of next year before we get any vehicles at the earliest. So, but I'll also would be willing to answer any questions that the commissioners have on the spreadsheet that I just gave them as well.
Did I hear that we anticipate that the jail population will be up next year?
Yes.
Why?
Well, we're seeing, if you look at the trends over the last 2 years, we're sort of getting out of the COVID push down of population. We are still at the point now where our numbers can fluctuate from anywhere between the 50s and the 60s, depending on what's going on, which is low. But we still haven't had a lot of the inmates that we would have based on the trial courts are still not running full. The admin courts are still not running full. And probation, which is probably the biggest piece, probation is still leaving us alone. So we're not getting many inmates as far as weekenders, which weekender is really a misnomer. We can have a weekender anytime. A weekender might be slated to come from Tuesday to Thursday, and we're not having any of those as far as in our numbers go. The dips and dunks and what are the other names that probation uses, they're not really using those right now to keep our numbers down. But eventually it's going to get to the point where the court system is running business as usual, and when in that case, when that comes back up, then we're going to be back into the 60s and 70s, which what I would consider a normal number for the jail.
Everybody's good?
Okay, thanks.
Brian?
So the next is emergency services, which starts on page 145. As we went through that one, and the director and his division heads are here tonight to talk about any specific information you may need. But under emergency medical services, you'll see that budget is actually decreased from last year's recommended budget. It's down by 2.8%. Emergency management is up about 20%. That's a small department, and we are replacing a vehicle in that department this year, or proposed in next year's budget, at about $47,000. So that is driving about half of that. Overall, there's also, as we talked about with all the other departments, there's insurance, there's retirement, all those things that are on top of that. So when we look at that, the main driver is that vehicle replacement. And then under animal control, you'll see they're up about 13%. There's some additional equipment replacement that they need to do. Obviously, a lot of stuff gets worn out. There's some work we've got to do on the kennels that we need to do to make sure that those are sealed up so that so when the state comes to inspect that everything's good. There's also a proposal in there to do some capital equipment and to redo the sign out front so that we can probably help out with some better advertisement and getting folks to the shelter and helping adopt animals. So those are the three pieces of the emergency services budget, and be glad to answer any questions or pass those over to the director and his department heads if you have any specific questions, if we need to drill down on those.
Gentlemen? John?
Brian, the EMS tax revenue, which is the taxes they levy on those people that are not in another EMS taxing area, right?
There are districts, so everybody is in a district unless you live in the city of Washington, and then the city of Washington covers theirs.
Right.
And Bath, which you're going to get picking up, and Belhaven. Belhaven pays their own now, and come July 1, if the board approves it, then Bath will roll into and we will be charging.
Okay.
And there are no changes across any of those this year.
Okay, the question is the tax revenue that we're getting from the taxes we're levying on those nonprofit districts, is that sufficient to cover the expenses?
No, not in general.
Okay, so what are we taking from the general fund to make that balance?
Well, what we're in the areas that are covered not by the county, the departments are making up that difference. They're having fundraisers, they're doing whatever to cover their budgets. So there is a portion that we're moving back, and I'm not sure, what are you looking at, Nick? Can you look at that number? 904.
904,000 is the district tax.
Okay.
Yeah, that's on page 20, right?
The general fund,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay, so we're taking in 904,000 from those districts that are the North Beaufort and the two on the south side.
Bath Township, Washington Township, Town of Belhaven, Town of Bath, Town of Pantego, and did I miss one? That should be it. That's it.
Okay. So again, do we know what's coming out of the general fund to?
Yes, so whatever yeah, so if we take the total expenditures for EMS, the $3,014,344 that's recommended, and subtract the 900,000, that would give us that difference.
And there's also billing.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We also have some,
Yes.
we have the billing that offsets that cost as well, but then again, we have some additional expenditures that are going to be in the communications budget for the emergency dispatch folks. So we have expenses in various places as well as different revenues that offset those expenses.
Okay, let me see if we can get this from you. If we were to operate this as an enterprise fund, what would the deficit be?
I'd have to calculate it for
Okay, can you
Yeah,
do that?
we've done that before.
Okay.
We've provided that before. Yeah, I can update those numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
The last time that we dug into it, it was plus or minus $1 million.
Yeah, so, and the other piece of that is that there should be a portion that's helping the overall coverage because the county is responsible under the administration of the plan from the state to ensure that all that occurs. So there's some oversight that would naturally be a part of that as well.
In other words, what you're saying, we're not charging an administrative fee to these departments that are kind of standalone as it relates to billing and
No, we're just
reporting.
We're just taxing the taxpayer for that.
Well,
you're actually maxed out.
Yes.
Most of the districts are maxed out at 5 cents, so you can't go any higher than 5 cents because of the way the districts were put in.
So the difference is just being made up out of the general fund.
general fund.
Which is the taxpayer across all taxpayers in the county.
But no district can go higher than 5 cents.
That's correct. But there was statutorily, there's a way to put those districts in, and as I recall, when the county put them in, they essentially did the short form way of doing it. And when you do the short form way, you can only go 5 cents as the maximum you can go. If you'd done it a different way and done it essentially the long form way and done some other stuff, you could have gone higher. But the county chose to do the short form kind of.
Other questions? Okay, we're good?
Okay, so the next piece is Forestry Service, and that starts on page 151. And as you'll recall, this is an agreement you have with the North Carolina Forest Service in the state of North Carolina, in which the state pays 60% of the budget, and Beaufort County pays 40% of the budget under a cooperative agreement. So they give us their budget, what they anticipate, and we match that up. The budget's up a little bit. I think they've got some replacements they've got going on. We're showing 2.5% increase for $4,200. The good news about that is if they don't spend it, they're one of the agencies in the state. If they don't need it, they don't spend it. So we don't match up against it. So typically our budgets come in under unless there's a big forest fire, unless they've got to do something here locally. And we've had that happen before, where they've used the whole budget, or we've actually had to throw a little bit more to them. But if it's a good year, then we're okay, because we match up against what they spend at 40%.
No questions, or we'll go to the next item?
Okay, and then the next item is other emergency services, and that's on page 153. Those are a couple of things that the board helps out with. The Sydney Dive Team, you have historically funded them at about $10,000 each year. I believe there's a service expansion this year from the Sydney Dive Team. You know, they were given some money by another county to help out, and I think what they're asking for, not in this, but in the expansion budget, is some additional help just for some additional training, because they got the extra helmet and they needed to train on that. We also provide funding. The county also provides funding at $3,500 for the Volunteer Fire Department Safety House, and that's essentially the house that they pull around on the trailer that helps kids understand how to get out of a house when there's smoke and when there's fire, and to teach fire safety. So the county's always committed to helping out and making sure that that piece of equipment is usable and is updated as it needs to, and can be taken around all the different places for kids to get education on fire. And then the medical examiner, you'll see in that budget we've got about $45,000. The medical examiner charges when they investigate suspicious deaths throughout the county, and the county's on the hook for that by statute. And typically what we see is about 15% of all deaths. That accounts for about 15% of all deaths statewide that have to be investigated by a medical examiner. So again, that goes up and down. So historically we kind of trended out, and that's where we think we're going to be, is about 45. So those are the three items under other emergency services. I'd be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Any questions? Okay, we're good.
That takes us into the special revenues. You'll see that starts on page 157, and let us get into those. So of these, you'll see the description starting on page 155. That's the E911 telephone system. That's where we get funds from the state, where the state applies a surcharge on telephones, and that money goes to the state 911 board. They divvy it out to counties who have public safety answering points, and it's based on the number. I'm trying to remember if it's based on population or what it's based on. There's a formula that it's based on, and then they look at the amount of money that you have in fund balance related to 911, and they discount it if you have too much fund balance. But this is the funding that we get from the state. Then you have the state and federal seized funds. That's revenues and expenses associated with the seized drug funds that we get from state and federal government that the sheriff's office uses. You have the fire and rescue districts. This is the fund that accounts for the tax collections and distributions, and we'll get into this a little bit further starting on page 157. Again, you have the tax reval reserve fund. We talked about that in the budget message. You are required by statute to set aside a certain amount of money each year so that you can pay for the revaluation when it comes up. That's where that is. The economic development fund we talked about is what we call the airport grant fund under the old agreement, or under the old arrangement where the county and the city were together on the airport and the county stepped out of it on the agreement, you set a baseline back in the year that happened. The county always gets that amount from the valuation, the revenues that are received off the valuation at the time that agreement was made. Everything above that goes to the city. It's sort of an incentive for them to grow the valuation out there, because when it grows, they get additional money. So that's where we show that money. The money comes to us because it's only taxed at the county level that was de-annexed in order to provide an economic incentive for people to locate at the airport. But that's where we show that money coming into and then paying out on the airport grant. The capital reserve fund is funds that set aside for future capital purchases. The home community care block grant services, that's for eligible seniors, that comes from the state. The healthcare reserve fund, you'll recall, that's the fund that the county received when they closed out the trailing liabilities for Vidant Health System. And those funds were set up. The county borrowed against that. You'll see in the budget where we're paying ourselves back. We talked about that during the presentation. I think we have eight. It was a 10-year loan. Yeah, it was a 10-year loan. So I think we've got 8 years left on that, and we're paying ourselves back in interest. Then you have the facility and capital reserve fund. That is where you set aside 1 penny of your tax valuation a couple years ago to go to for projects for capital. We'll get into that in detail. EMS Special Revenue Fund, starting on page 156. That accounts for the EMS billing. That's where you get the collections. We use a collection firm to help us with that. There's also the debt set-off, and that's been successful for us, where if people don't pay their bill, the statute allows us to send that to debt set-off so that it will come out of someone's tax returns or it will come out of their lottery proceeds, so we're able to collect that money. Then you see the additional special revenue funds that are 4-H, Cooperative Extension, and DSS. You'll remember 2 years ago, GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, who sets the standards for accounting, GASB standards, said you've got to account for these funds in a different manner. They were essentially being accounted for under those departments. So we had to pull those out. So those are special programs they have. The example is like in 4-H, the 4-H special. So they have the livestock show and sale. They have summer camping, 4-H programs. That's to account for those funds and make sure they're taken care of appropriately. So we had to do that for 4-H. We had to do it for the Cooperative Extension. We had to do it for DSS. And then you have the new one, the Beaufort Promise. That's where the board voted to say set aside funds for the education at the community college. So that is where that sits. Starting on page 157, you'll actually see the detail. This is the revenue side. And then if you go to starting on page 159, you'll see the expenses. So looking at that, you'll see, just starting at the top, and I'll be glad to answer any of the questions as you go through it, but no sense me going through it completely. Like the 911, you have the 911 surcharge that's estimated at $116,817. You got fund balance appropriated out of the 911 fund of $29,936, so a total of $146,752 that the state considers to be eligible 911 revenues that you can expend funds on. So then if you look on the other side, if you look on page 159, you'll see the E911 expenditures. They balance out. You'll see we're recommending $81,000 for telephone, $19,000 and change for software, maintenance, $11,000 for hardware, furniture, and then training at $24,000. And these are all eligible expenses that the state says you can use that special money for. If it's not in one of those categories, then the county's got to pick it up. So there's certain things like radios. You're not allowed to use 911 funds. Again, it's one of those things we just beat our head against the wall sometimes when we go to the General Assembly and they say, well, you can't spend, or the state 911 board says you can't spend that money because of statute. And essentially, you can do everything in receiving the call from the 911 system to putting it in the system to getting ready to dispatch, but then once that happens, it has to be picked up by a county dollar. So it's really a flawed system in the funding piece of it. And that's something that is an argument back and forth every year. I don't know that it'll ever change. But that 146,752 matches up with what we show in the revenues, and that goes throughout all of it. So you'll see, all the way down the tax valuation. You'll see the EMS districts. So if there are any questions relating to those, be glad to answer those. But those are the details of those big pieces.
John?
maybe you said this, but I didn't hear it. Why are we almost off 50% in the 911 surcharge?
We're off about 50% because 50% of what they do over there is non-eligible for 911 funds. You can't spend 911 funds on it. All you can spend the money on in 911 is answering the 911 call, getting the 911 call to you, answering it, and putting it in the system. You can't pay to dispatch it. You can't pay to get on the radio. You can't pay to do those things associated with it. You can pay for the phone lines and the dispatching software and those kind of things.
So what happened last year?
What do you mean?
Why were we able to spend almost 50% more last year?
The funding that they gave us each year, in fact, we just got the letter today and the email from them, from the 911 board that says, here's how much money you can spend next year. It's based on our fund balance. So essentially they dinged us a little bit and said, you've got fund balance sitting there, and since you have some fund balance, we're going to ding you and not give you as much because we want you to spend down your fund balance. So we're spending some of our fund balance down, but the state 911 board is doing that on purpose to try to make counties spend down their 911 funds.
Good. Okay, the 4-H Special Revenue Fund, we fund that to the tune of $36,000 a year.
No, there's no county money in that.
Okay, where does that money come from?
That comes from their programs.
They collect that money?
Yes, sir.
All right.
So it's in and out, but we have to account for it and show it.
Cooperative Extension Special Revenue Fund, is that the same thing?
Yes, sir, same thing.
They collect that money?
Self-supporting.
They just have to pass it through us?
Yes, sir, we have to show it.
DSS Representative Pay Special Revenue, where does that money come from?
So, yeah, it's federal funds.
They write us a check for that?
Yes.
What do we use that money for?
Yeah, so Melanie should have, sorry, Melanie left. We were just talking about that. It's restricted client funds that are for wards, that folks who need custody for someone who can't look after themselves, essentially.
So it's their money,
Yes.
not our money, their
Yeah, there
money.
are no county funds in this.
I got you, okay.
John?
One last one. Brian, under the C's funds, why are we adding fund balance to that?
Because there's actually fund balance there.
There's fund balance in the C's funds, right?
Yes, sir. So the sheriff's office is saying, we want to spend this much money out of that, and so we added some fund balance to it to be able to equal that.
Can you give us the fund balance in these accounts?
We can. I mean, you can pull that for you. Don't have it right off the top of our head.
Right.
Brian and Charlie and Anita, how do we fund changing our technology in the 911 center? And where I'm going, I'm assuming right now we cannot, if somebody is in a hostage situation and they try to send a text, will that go through at the 911? Can you pick that up, a text?
No, not right
cannot.
now. We do have the consoles that we have now are capable of doing that, but we're working on getting the correct and upgraded modules through our operating system to do that, and all of that is in the budget. Was in the budget, got cut last year, it's in the budget again this year, so if we get the modules to do that, then we'll be able to upgrade that.
The actual 911 money that's collected from people that live in Beaufort County, does all that go to Raleigh to one central place, and then you've got to petition the board for a grant or something to get the money back?
So actually, it's charged against your phone line. So there's a surcharge against your phone line.
Right.
There's the fee on your landline if you have one. There's a fee on the cell phone if you have one. Those funds are collected by the state. They go to the 911 board, and then they take some of that they take a cut out of. And use it for statewide programs like flying aerials. It used to be that was not something that was funded. The state took over that with the 911 funds, so they fly the state once each section of the state gets flown once every 3 years. So the eastern part of the state will get flown, the central part of the state, and the mountains will get flown. They use 911 money to do that. The 911 board does, and we get those maps. Everybody in the state gets those maps. Then they have a formula in which they send funding to each 911, each primary public safety answering point, PSAPs. And you're able to use those money for specific things in the legislation that are allowed. Like I say, radios are not allowed. They will pay for training. They will pay for the equipment. But you can't, one of the things that was very, that I thought should have been as clear as day to the folks in the General Assembly. They did a presentation to them, and they said, here's what you can spend. We're going to show you what you can spend 911 money for, the way you have in the legislation. So they had the person on the dialing 911, they had the telecommunicator header answering the line, taking the information, and then they said, I'm getting ready to dispatch, and they cut it off. And they said, you can't pay for anything else. So the county is required to step in at that point, pay for all the radios related to that, and ensuring that information gets passed back. So there's always a push to the state to try to expand that. Unfortunately, years and years ago, there were some bad things that were done with 911 money. Some counties, before it was as tight as it was, some counties were buying fire trucks with it, things like that.
Well, yeah, originally, the money went to us, we put it in a special fund, and then we just drew down based on the legislation. But because of abuses, the legislature, in their infinite wisdom, put controls on it.
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, if I may add just on that, some of the fund balance that we still have goes back to, I'm sure that most of you will remember when the state was pushing for an identical backup PSAP to be built in the county. So when they were pushing funds for that, so they can say, whatever you have in your main office, we want the same stuff, same building. And there were some agencies, and we were one of those, that sort of pushed against that, so that we had the money that they were saying you can use for that, but we didn't spend it on that, and now we're sort of paying the price to get back to where the 911 thinks that we should be as far as funding goes. We have, through the director of 911, we've tried to push and push and push to see exactly what we can use those funds for and the ways that we would use those in our office, and we're getting sort of pushed back on that, and that's the breakaway from that is that the 911 board said, all right, we're going to give you less funds until you have the money that we think you should have.
Jared?
Brian, based on what you said, so the modules that the sheriff's department need in the 911 center, you said anything that's incoming until they dispatch that the 911 money should fund. So therefore, if what you're looking for is to cover text messages coming in, that should be applicable.
It can be, and I think that's what Chief Deputy's saying is we're able to cover that. We're just not there yet. It's in the process.
Well, he was saying that it was in the budget and it got taken out, and so if that being the case, it should have never been taken out. That's what I'm thinking.
He was talking about the duplication.
No. Vice Chairman is very correct. Where it gets squishy is that program that runs that is also attached to Motorola, who runs a lot of the radio systems and the computers, and also owns Spillman Summit, who is our CAD operator now. So you can't just go in and go, I want this piece of the text to 911. You've got to buy this package to get that, and some of that would be covered by 911 and some of them wouldn't be. I mean, they're going to get their money.
I think we're good. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine there. Under the page 160, Medicare cost settlement, $500,000. Do we know how that's going to be allocated out? Is this the cost settlement that we went through last year?
Yes.
Okay. So where Medicare is giving funds to the county, excess funds? Okay.
Yes, any excess Medicaid funds,
Right.
it's distributed back to the counties.
Okay. I would like to know before we approve the budget how that's going to be allocated.
It'll be allocated, the methodology will be the same as last year.
Well,
I don't know what the dollar amount will be until the settlement is approved.
this is an expected amount?
That is, yes, a budget amount. It's an estimated amount.
Okay.
It goes to the general fund, doesn't it, when it comes in? That's what we're doing now.
Part of it goes to the general fund, but because we bill on behalf of agencies, they get a portion of it as well.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's going away. It's going to get less and less each year. With Medicaid transformation, when they change that, there's going to be less and less cost settlement.
Right.
Essentially, it'll go to zero.
That's
There'll be
right. The original theory behind that was the federal government messed up in apportioning funds, and then some senators and congressmen set up a deal for disproportionate share for poor counties, and there's all kinds of things that go into it, but it has to eventually disappear.
We're good. Thanks. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So moving on out of the general fund now into the enterprise funds. And of course, as you recall, enterprise funds are set up as business-like services in that you are providing a commodity or an item or a service for folks, and you do that in a business-like manner in which you charge a fee or a rate for that service, and the people who use that service are essentially paying for that, and you hope that you're able to cover all that in the full ride. So there are two of those. That is the water fund that is separate. You'll see in the water fund, that budget's about $8.3 million. You do show this year is the completion of the rate study that started back in 1819. So now all the districts, there's 7 districts, and all of those districts are now uniform in their rates. You remember at one time, bug flying around, at one time we had different rates across different districts. And the board's direction after we looked at it all was to make those uniform. When you consolidated all the districts financially under one system when you did that several years ago. So we are now at the end point of that. So this year, all the rates are the same across all the districts. So in some districts, it went up a little bit, and some districts went down a little bit, but now they're all uniform. We are continuing the capital improvement plan for the entire water system that was established back in 1819. $183,950 are recommended as capital, and then we are funding some contingency at a little over $28,000 in the water fund. There are some additional water projects that are out there that are being funded, that the board's chosen to fund under ARPA, so that helps us overall in the enterprise fund. But that's where this is, and the Public Works Director is here to answer any questions you may have about the water districts.
Questions, John?
We have, we show in the budget, there's $70,000 for credit card fees. And that's an increase, but I know that the credit card companies are increasing their fees. Is it going forward? It started about a month ago. Are we going to be in a position that we need to take a look at whether or not we have a surcharge on credit card usage? And I don't know, is the water district the only place that we accept credit cards? Tax office?
Yeah, we accept credit card payments for taxes. However, for taxes, the county cannot absorb the credit card processing fee. It has to be passed on to the citizen.
Okay.
With an enterprise fund such as water, we've always considered the credit card processing fee as a part of doing business, just like a merchant would. But now there is an option that was approved a couple years ago where merchants can pass that fee along to the customer. Used to not be able to do that before that.
Well, I think if we start seeing year over year, these rates start to go up, we ought to probably take a look at that to keep ourselves whole.
So really the reason for the increase is more utilization of credit card payments because of COVID, I believe, rather than rate increases.
Well, it was on the news that they're raising their rates across the board.
I have not seen any rate increases. They tried to increase our rates about 2 or 3 years ago when they passed the rule where you could pass the fee along to the customer.
Sure.
And I called and renegotiated those back down. But I've not heard of any increases, but I'll definitely check into that.
Okay.
I really feel like it's more utilization of people paying online and by phone with a credit card because they don't want to come into the office during COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Right offhand, do you know what the fund balance is in the water enterprise? I mean, you can email it if you,
I can email it, but it's probably close to 8 million, somewhere
Okay.
around there. But I'll email you an exact.
and also the solid waste, just both of them.
Yes, sir. I'll send those to you.
I had that written down.
Okay. John had written it down on his sheet too, so.
We'll be glad to get that to you. So you ready to move on to solid waste?
Everybody good? Yeah.
Okay, so solid waste is your other enterprise fund. And again, in that, it's about $4.2 million that were recommended. It does include a recommended $5 increase in the solid waste fee. That would take it to a total of $175 from $170. And that increase is recommended to pay for the increased costs of disposal and inflation. Obviously, the solid waste industry, we're not decreasing any of that. We are a throwaway society, and people are just finding more stuff to throw away, or they're buying more stuff to throw away. There are some efforts under the solid waste department to look at some recycling efforts they're trying to bring back into play. But that is not going to take out of the residential solid waste a significant portion where it's going to drive that down. I mean, it's going to help a little bit, but it's not going to be a significant player, unfortunately. We just got a lot of stuff. We are a throwaway society. So those costs continue to go up. We are we have how many years left, Christina, on our solid waste contract? 4. So we got 4 more years on our current solid waste contract. So there is, as you recall, in that contract, we had a fixed rate for a certain number of years, and now we're in a fluctuation that's based on CPI. So there's some increase moving forward on that based on CPI. And then we'll be, like I say, in 4 years ready to renegotiate that and try to drive those down again. But it's just a really difficult market. We don't have much control at all. And you know, that was a decision that was made many years ago. You know, some counties got into the business of solid waste. They have their own landfills. County, once a blue moon ago, had a landfill. They are extremely expensive. There are a lot of environmental pieces related to that. And they're very difficult to locate now. So our challenge is that we're kind of at the mercy, because we don't own one ourselves, so we can't really say you'll bring it to us and this is what the rate we'll do. We're kind of at the mercy of the market to what the providers will say, and it's really interesting. I mean, it is. It's all about negotiations and long-term engagements and all sorts of stuff, because you may have a different rate. You may have a provider in one county who gets one rate and another provider in the same county who gets another rate, and they're hauling to the same landfill. So it's really interesting how it all works. But we are locked into our contract. We are continuing, just like in the water fund, we're continuing to show an administrative fee that's being paid out of those enterprise funds back to the general fund to offset the costs where general fund employees are doing work for those enterprise funds, which only makes sense, it's only fair. We're transferring $50,000 into the solid waste fund balance in an effort to build up that fund so we can start doing capital improvements like we need to. And then contingency is funded, you know, slightly at only $8,000 in contingency. So again, we've struggled with that fund to try to make it where it needs to be. As you'll recall, several years ago, we had it in the general fund. It was being heavily subsidized by the general fund, and it was really hard to see how much money it was costing you, so you were subsidizing it with general tax dollars. Now it's really clear what it costs, but it's almost embarrassing how much it costs when it comes down to disposing of solid waste. And it's going to take a change in society and how we deal with that to make any significant impact on it.
How many parcels being charged this $175?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
How many people being charged just under the $170 a month? Do you have that?
Last time I checked, it was 22,000 plus.
Close to 23,000, I believe.
There is some other money that comes in. Is it from the white goods,
Yes,
tires?
so there's some of that, but part of that is, and it's relating to using those. So the white goods is used to provide for disposal of those white goods. To be able to recapture Freon in some of those white goods, because you can't dispose of that into the atmosphere. The tires, we use that money to pay for disposal of tires because we're required by the state law to do that. So yes, there are some programs, but with those programs comes expenditures that are related to those programs.
You want to take a stab on the fund balance in solid waste? You got,
I think I looked at that number for Christina and West, and it was about 650,000 a couple months ago. Am I remembering correctly? Y'all don't remember? What's wrong with y'all? I'm going to say about 650 is what I recall, but I would like to double check those numbers and email you.
so there is enough money as we move forward with the engineering work to be able to,
Yes, we have
Okay.
verified that.
all right. Any other questions on solid waste?
I have one.
Okay.
To what extent will we be able to use some of the ARPA funds for solid waste now that we know solid waste will qualify?
So essentially, you could, whatever the board decides they want to use, you could, because the way we're showing that to the federal government treasury is that we're reimbursing ourselves for personnel costs that's allowed. It's essentially exactly the way we did under the CARES funds. So we free up the restrictions that are placed on it, and it gives us a longer time frame. So that money will that money will offset, the money will come in, we'll show that we're using it as a revenue loss, and those funds are used in that revenue loss to provide reimbursement for personnel in emergency services and sheriff's office and public safety that's allowed under the expenditures. And then that frees up the county's dollars to roll the fund balance that then allows you to use those funds to do other things that were originally restricted. Now you're free to use those for other things.
So,
And the time frame goes away too, because remember, under ARPA, you got to have it spent and committed, you got to have it committed by 24 and spent out by 26. If you do it this way, you don't have any time frames.
so under those parameters of expenditures, we could quite possibly use that money for anything this board deems as a wise use of the funds
You could use it for
within solid waste.
You could use it for anything that you are statutorily allowed to spend money on any program.
Beyond solid waste, okay.
Right.
I think we've asked Christina and the consultant to move forward with the plan on the super sites.
Yeah, but that was before we found out there was extra money. We were just heard from the manager, we are a throwaway society, yet we do nothing with recycling at this point. If we're going to do a super site, we need to consider what the functional possibilities of bringing a more robust recycling attitude towards the super site, so that maybe our society will be less throwaway and better citizens.
Yeah, I think that is.
That would be a good possibility. That's a conservative method, a conservative measure.
Okay. Are we finished?
We are on the enterprise funds. We'll move to where you see the internal service fund. This is the workers' compensation fund. Just want to hit that briefly. This is a new established internal service fund, and that accounts for the services within our different governmental departments, and is used to pool the resources so that we can make a cheaper operational cost. So you have the workers' compensation fund, so we're pulling, you'll see in the detail on page 173, payments from the general fund, that's so we're pulling $600,000 out of fund balance, then the additional $146,000 plus the 600 makes the 746 that comes out of general fund to be the total there, and then we're pulling 30 out of water fund because they're covered by our workers' comp as well. So that gives us a total revenue of 776, and then we're showing what potential claims could come out of that. So remember, this is a way for us to drive down our premium and hope and set up that fund so that we're able to do that. And no changes in our workers' compensation. I mean, we're still covered at the same level we are. We're just taking a higher deductible.
Any questions on the workers' compensation fund? You want to move to the capital projects?
Yes, sir. So on page 175, you'll see the 1 penny that's set aside. 603,275 is the transfer. Building improvements of 575. There's contingency of 28,275. And where are they?
I think I misput the page in the book. I'm sorry, I'll need to get that. The details missing there on those projects.
So Christina, you do have them with you.
I'm so
Christina's got
sorry.
them.
Yeah, I just did that. Absolutely.
Do you want to make copies and just pass them out? Can you do that, Katie?
Let me see what, hold on, you can see if I have it presented so that you can do that.
If you don't have it, I have it in my office.
No, I have it, I just have to get to the right page, I believe. I know, exactly. I have everything else in here. Right there.
So, Mr. Chairman, while we're waiting on that one, if you want to, if there are any questions, as you move to page 177, you will see our administrative charges, how we account for the administrative charges to the general fund. You'll see that percentage, what it's based on. It looks at our, there's an allocation study that's done every year that we're required to do for DSS because those cost allocations are required under that program, and we use those to look at how we charge back against the basis for each of the funds. So, any questions on that?
Anyone have any questions on the breakdown for the administrative?
Have any of these percentages changed significantly from last year? Do you know?
No, not really. I mean, because they're based on general time, like the governance time by the board, and then most of it, when you look at invoices paid by the fund, number of computers, splitting the actual cost of mailing the annual bills, and then 50% of the tax collector. So there's a little bit of change in them, but nothing tremendously significant.
Anyone else? Okay.
Then the last piece that's in there is on page one, starts on page 179, and that's the fee schedule, the fee manual that we present to you each year. And these are the fees that we lay out to return or to pay for some of the activities that are done. So, there's general stuff, copies, tax collection fee, return check fees, and then you get into the details where you have solid waste, you have registered deeds, you have planning, environmental, all the specific items that they're charging for. So we lay that out for you each year. You'll see, occasionally during the year, you'll see some changes to this. We take a snapshot and we hope we get it, we have everything we need, but especially like in the health department, they'll have a new drug that comes out or a new vaccination that comes out that they've got to charge for, and so we get it in. That's why you'll see these come to you occasionally throughout the year. Or if there's a change that needs to be done based on a terrible increase in cost to us, we will make sure we pass that along instead of paying for it out of general funds. Of course, the last piece is the expansion piece, and that starts on Thursday. So the way we'll run that is we will have the departments come in first. So governmental departments will come in. We'll do general government first, we'll do enterprise funds second, and then we'll do outside agencies. And the way that's set up is if an outside agency is requesting new funding, so if they've never been funded by the board before and they want you to fund them, they'll come in and make their pitch to you. If they are an existing entity that's being funded and they're asking for more money, then they'll come in and ask you for that additional money. So they'll make their pitch to you. Our internal departments will make their pitch to you. Generally, as you look at it, there's I I'll pitch to you the general fund stuff that talks about everything, that hits all the departments, but individual departments will pitch their own. It kind of keeps me out of the middle of it and so that I don't play favorites on something that I think you probably ought to do, because it's the department heads who can pitch that to you and say why they think that. And of course, the budget is the board's budget to amend and look at and get done for your constituents, what you want to get done for, sir.
Got a request. You're doing one as it relates to the COLA less the reimbursements for health and DSS?
Yes, that's correct. And Anita ran those numbers today. So what we showed you based on a CPI from March 21 to March 22, which were the latest numbers we had when we were putting the budget together, because the numbers always come out a month later. So we had the 12-month for March, and that was a CPI of 9.1%. So we went in and calculated, starting at 5% up to a 9% COLA, what that would cost the general fund and then what that would cost each enterprise fund. And then Anita went in and worked out what the difference would be, because remember in DSS, this was just a broad calculation, but in DSS there's a reimbursement from the state, so they pick up generally 50%, some higher in some programs, some less in other programs, but generally we look at it about 50%. And in the health department there's also the same way. So you've got those numbers, I think, and if you can share those. I think she's pulling a lot right now.
Well, you could share it with everybody with an email, it's fine. The other thing I was going to ask you is on the 401k, I'm assuming that's taking us from where we're at now up to the 5%. Can you let us know what 1% would be on the 401k?
So
if we stepped it up over a 2 or 3 year period?
Yeah, so in general, and I don't want to we simply got some time we can talk about it. The reason, and I pitched this to you last year, and I think it's a really good thing to help employees. And you do a little bit of that right now. I mean, there's a slight match that the county does. I think if the employee puts in 1%, the county puts in 1%. Currently, law enforcement officers, by statute, you are required to put in 5% to their 401k. They don't have to contribute a penny. By statute, you are required to do that. So there are agencies across the state. In fact, I used to work for one in a municipality that said, if we're going to do that for our law enforcement, we're going to do it for everybody. I'm not asking you to do that. That would be a significant increase for us. What I am asking you to do is increase what you're doing up to 5% and say to the employee, you got to have some skin in this game, but we're willing to match you up to 5%. So that would equal you out with law enforcement. You're required to do law enforcement at 5. They don't have to put anything in. What I'm proposing to you is that you say to our county employees, we'll match you percent for percent up to 5%. Law enforcement can do that right now. They can put up to 5%. You're still going to put 5 in. You have to. But this essentially is, I've heard several of the board members say we want to be equal and fair about things. And I think that this helps do that. Plus, it's an incentive tool for us to help long-term employees and to help people stay. So I think it's a good plan. You help employees plan for their retirement and to look after themselves in later in life, and they've got to commit to it. They've got to be a part of it. It's not like you're just giving it to them. They've got to have some skin in the game. So Katie's put it out for you. Christine, you want to hit these? There's card access for all the facilities. There's a space study. There's a roof at Tideland. There's 2 phases of that, and then there's the VHM exterior, doing some work on that.
That pretty much sums it up. The card access would be, if you recall, the fiscal year 2022 budget, we did the buildings for the central campus located here downtown. So you'll see these are the buildings, the outline buildings, Farm Services, Tideland, Animal Control, the EOC, as well as the Health Department. The next item is the space study, which again, there's been multiple conversations throughout the years about looking at our overall buildings and looking at each department, the number of personnel, the type of square footage that they require. Do they require storage? Do they require desk space? Do they need cubicle space? Where do they see themselves in the next 5 years to 10 years looking at that? Then also the Tideland roof, Phase 2, moving forward with that. And then the last item is BHM exterior paint as well as the cupola repair. Anyone who makes this turn off of Market Street onto 2nd Street, you'll see that it needs some TLC. This does not include any window replacements. As you know, that's an extremely historical building, so we are just looking to go in and hopefully do repair work. I will go ahead and say that the $55,000 that's listed in this is not nearly enough to do a restoration of that building. This is only purely a paint job and immediate repairs of the cupola and that type of thing. To go in and to do a true restorations of all of those windows would be much more than that $55,000.
So we always have this conversation every year when we talk about it. The board was forward-thinking enough several years ago to say, let's put a penny aside. You funded the study that looked at our infrastructure and said, here's what you need to be setting aside each year to repair your existing facilities. And I think that was about $2 million when they looked at it. We should be spending about $2 million a year on our existing buildings to keep them up. You see what the second phase of, and that's not the entire roof at Tideland, that's the second phase of the roof at Tideland, is $350,000. So, we have a roofing plan in place. We did that several years ago. We had an engineer come in and look at all our roofs, give us a roofing plan so that instead of running around with our heads chopped off and trying to patch holes here and there, we got into a roofing replacement schedule where we were fixing roofs, fixing them correctly, and then moving on and making sure that they were set and we had 20-year, 25-year lives on them, and then we were moving to the next one. But there is still a tremendous amount of work that we need to do to keep up our buildings and our facilities. It is an investment that we've got to look after. I think I made the comment to you one time, it's like, if we don't do that, it's like adding a second bedroom on a house without fixing your roof. If rain's coming in your roof, you don't add new stuff until you fix and repair your old stuff. We got a lot of stuff we got to fix. Now, we've made good progress, and the board's pushed that, and we certainly appreciate that, but there's still more to go, and we would appreciate your help moving forward on that.
The Tideland roof, which building are we talking about?
Where the Board of Elections is housed.
Board of Elections
Board of
out on,
Elections.
okay. And then BHM, which building are we talking about there?
The library on the corner, the old court, the historic courthouse.
Okay. Ed?
Mr. Manager, I know you stated that we saw foresight to allocate a penny, and this is just something I want to throw out there. You also stated that we've got about $2 million behind it. 1 cent, how long will it be before we ever catch up?
Hang on. Okay. So a penny for us is about 600. So you need to start looking at dedicating a couple more pennies to get there. In addition to your, if you allocated 2 more to the 1, you'd almost get there. We could probably do that because some of the things in that plan looked at bringing our facilities up to standards that we would not, it also included sprinkling our buildings. We don't have to do that. Is it probably a good thing to do? Yeah, but we're not required by code to do that because they were built prior to that need. But if you were able to dedicate 2 more pennies to the capital reserve, then we could start making significant progress on keeping our buildings to where they need to be and looking after them.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Go back to the schedule on fees, all that stuff. Just what fees are being increased? Other than the $5
So in general, the $5 is increased. I think everything else generally is close to being the same. The water, remember the water, this is the last year of the adjustment, so everything's level, so there is some change in that, and we can show you those. Can you get them highlighted?
The uniform fees for water, they're on page 207.
So the water's going up?
No, not necessarily.
Some of the, remember we're getting to this uniform rate, so there was still,
Some districts need adjustment.
Some districts went down just a little bit, some went up, but we're now uniform, so we're all equal right now.
As of July the 1st, we'll be all on the same page.
That's correct.
Anyone else? Okay, we're gonna recess until May the 26th, Thursday night at 5 o'clock. So have a nice evening.